I've intended to make a video that was a little more prepared, a little more thought through about the latest upgrade that I've made to my DeLorean's ignition. But the cat's out of the bag, and I need to head off the boo birds at the pass before their brains explode. So the crux of the issue, I'm running zero resistance spark plugs, 0 ohm resistance spark plugs. And to cut off the controversy that this is going to engender, I've been running HEI, high energy ignition, for years and years and years and years and years. And I've made videos explaining all this, and explaining how you can make some very simple changes to your DeLorean to make its ignition more closely resemble ignition that would be standard in 1981. You know, any 1981 Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, Toyota, Mazda, Honda, Subaru, pretty much any vehicle you can think of. And the crux of the issue, where the rubber meets the road, is the spark plug gap. Okay, that's where the fuel air mixture gets ignited and combustion happens. And if you go to the parts house and look up the tune-up spec on pretty much any 1981 year model vehicle you can think of, like I said, any Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota, Mazda, Subaru, you're going to discover that the spark plug gap is about 0.04 inches, somewhere between 0.04 and 0.05 inches, as compared to the stock DeLorean spark plug gap, which is 0.024 inches, half of what everybody else is running. And the reason the DeLorean spark plug gap is so small is because if you were to put a 0.04 to 0.05 inch spark plug gap on an unmodified DeLorean ignition system, you would have inconsistent ignition. It would be you would not get a consistent spark. People also say that the Blue Bosch coil can't handle HEI. I don't know if that's true or not. It's a moot point for me because I run a Protronics coil, and the Protronics data sheet that comes with the coil, says in black and white, this coil can handle full system charging voltage. And as I've explained in those other videos, the coil that I'm running is rated for 40,000 volts, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to produce 40,000 volts. It's only going to produce as much secondary voltage as is necessary to jump the spark plug gap. And in my case, it's about 0.045, 0.046 inches. Can't remember exactly which. But the DeLorean 0.024 spark plug gap requires obviously much less voltage, half as much voltage to jump it. So the coil is discharging, half as much voltage as my Protronics coil. And I've got a video where I shoot my coil with a temperature gun and it's running like 120 degrees or something. The boo birds all say, your coil is going to be so hot, it's going to melt the coil. Boil the oil inside the coil. It's like, no, it's like 120 degrees. I think the highest reading I get is like 129. And so, 129 degrees is not hot enough to boil oil. It's not hot enough to damage anything. You can actually touch the coil. It's warm, but it's not too hot to touch. It's like taking a hot shower. But anyway, the reason that the DeLorean spark plug gap is so small, and the reason that they have such a hard time jumping it, is because of all the resistance that they throw up on the secondary side. The stock DeLorean ignition system has about 10,000 ohms of resistance on the secondary side, which is insane. Absolutely insane. And I made videos where I talk about that. But, like, for example, the DeLorean rotor button, stock DeLorean rotor button, has 5,000 ohms of resistance from the center conductor to the blade. And if you compare that to a domestic rotor button, this is a Ford Duraspark rotor button, you can see it's metal the whole way. So the Ford rotor button here is going to have 0 ohms of resistance from the center conductor to the blade is basically 0 ohms of resistance. Whereas if you compare that to a DeLorean rotor button, I don't have an unmodified rotor button. All my rotor buttons have been modified. Because what I do, I route out all that resistive material and solder in a piece of Romex, 12 gauge Romex. So now, obviously, this rotor button is 0 ohms of resistance, just like that Ford Duraspark rotor button. And after I solder in that piece of Romex, I pot it in silicone so it looks nice. So this looks like a stock rotor button, but as you can see, it's 0 ohms of resistance. So I make these for people, and the very first thing that the spark encounters is the rotor button. This is what's distributing the spark to all the cylinders. So you got 5,000 ohms versus 0 ohms. So that's the first change. Well, the spark plugs themselves have resistance in them. There's a little teeny weeny resistor. Underneath the terminal there's a little teeny weeny resistor. Then you have the copper rod that runs down to the other end of the spark plug. And this is an NGK spark plug. This is like what most DeLorean owners are running. And this spark plug here has about 5,000 ohms of resistance passing through it. $4,950 ohms of resistance. Now, this would be pretty typical. A resistor spark plug with a 0 ohm rotor button is what you're going to find on most 1981 year model vehicles: Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, Datsun, Toyota, Honda, Subaru. And the reason they do that is to cut down on EMI, electromagnetic interference, because you'll pick up ignition noise on AM radio otherwise. The only reason to cut down on EMI on a 1981 year model vehicle is to prevent ignition noise from interfering with your AM radio. Not FM. FM's impervious. But AM radio will pick up ignition noise unless you have this 5,000 ohm resistor. Well, DeLorean has doubled that to 10,000 ohms of resistance. So that's why the spark plug gap is half as big. Well, I was poking through my Volvo literature. I have a library of Volvo literature. And what I noticed was that the European PRVs, the European Volvos with PRVs, do not run resistor spark plugs. They run non-resistor spark plugs. This is the spark plug that they run, is the plain old H6. I believe the DeLorean was HR6 or H6R or something like that, to denote that had 5,000 ohms of resistance. But these plain old H6 spark plugs, this is a European spec spark plug, are 0 ohms of resistance. And so in Europe, they would get a 0 ohm spark plug, a 5,000 ohm resistor for 5,000 ohms on the secondary side, which would be the same thing that you would get on a 1981 year model vehicle with a 0 ohm rotor and a 5,000 ohm spark plug, resistance spark plug. Well, if you poke around the various performance automotive groups, they're all about non-resistor spark plugs because they don't care about AM radio. I don't care about AM radio. And and there's guys out there that have very sophisticated measuring equipment, and they measure, I believe it's called joules, and they can measure the joules in the spark. And when you switch from a resistor spark plug to a non-resistor spark plug, the spark energy just increases magnitudes. It's way, way, way more powerful spark, which is, going to be better combustion. The more fire you can throw at the mixture, the more likely you are to light it off and have it burn completely. And what they typically do is, if you unscrew this terminal here, there's a little teeny weeny resistor in there. They pour out the resistor, they cut a little piece of Romex, drop it in there, and screw the terminal back on. Well, Bosch has already done that for me. There's no resistor in here. This is a 0 ohm spark plug, and this is what they would have been running in Europe, albeit with a 5,000 ohm rotor button. But there you go, 0 ohm resistant spark plug. And I'm sure the boo birds are going to be claiming that my car is going to blow up. I mean, anytime I do anything to this car, they just come out of the woodwork and bitch and complain. But let me get all this out of the way so it doesn't fall on the floor. Let me energize the vehicle. I've been running these since the beginning of last summer. So as you can see, the vehicle runs just fine. I've got a video where I accelerate in second gear. Turn this off so you don't have to listen to that. I have a video where I accelerate in second gear from somewhere around 20 miles an hour to about 60. And it takes me, I think, about 5 seconds to do it, which is pretty much, remember now, this is a low compression PRV. This is not a high compression PRV. This is a low compression. So the ability to get from 20 to 60 in about 5 seconds isn't too shabby. And the spark plugs look beautiful. I had resistor spark plugs. I had Autolite resistors in here previously, and when I pulled them out, they looked beautiful. They were just this very light tan color. So I was getting a really nice burn. And Bryce Polistran was kind enough to send me a video. He's got an air fuel gauge attached to his carbureted DeLorean, which runs at stowage. I got a video up showing that. So I'm running a stowage mixture with plenty of fire, and so all the boo birds that bitch and complain about my modifications I make to my car, the performance crowd, the guys who, the old head performance crowd, you got all these people that have microprocessor controlled engines, they're going to be in a whole different world. But the old head performance crowd, the people who run basically old-fashioned hot rods, I'm sure that they would agree with me because they make non-resistor spark plugs. It's just a nice, convenient thing that Bosch already makes non-resistor spark plugs for me, so I don't have to pour the resistor out and put a little piece of Romex in. But anyway, these are the spark plugs that I'm running. They're H6DC, not HR6 or H6R. And these are what would be standard equipment on a European PRV, a European Volvo 260 or 760. But that is the latest change that I've made to my ignition system to upset the purists.